You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 211 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with Pankaj Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod is Runeblade too strong right now in Classic Constructed, except for Vincent. Is Runeblade too strong in Classic Constructed? 2/3 of Runeblades. We're going to talk all things about that. We're going to talk about ProQuest Week 2, which is just wrapped up. We are 2/5 of the way through this ProQuest season, this new 5-week ProQuest season. Lots of events happening for ProQuest Singapore, and we might have another Living Legend hero this coming weekend, which is crazy. We might get 3 in 3 weeks Living Legend.
And it is yet another Runeblade. I just realized as we started this, we missed an opportunity, Hayden. We should have made the title more clickbaity. We should have said, Runeblade is busted, broken, in Classic Construct.
Oh, I can still change
Runeblade
that.
has been busted forever. Yeah.
Runeblade
new title of the
broken.
pod, Runeblade busted, completely, 100%. Ban all Runeblades from now on.
Let me
in Classic
workshop.
Constructed.
What about Rune-Busted? Question mark.
Ooh,
Ooh,
yep.
Yeah.
All right. Rune broken.
Rune broken. Yep. Okay. Done. We'll get into all those things and we'll look ahead at the next 3 weeks of ProQuest Season 2. These meta changes, what we're looking to play, and what we think might just be good picks out there as we move through the remainder of this ProQuest season. First of all, though, Pankaj, as always, how has your week in Flesh and Blood been?
It's been good. I played 2 ProQuests this past weekend, and your quest to convince all our impressionable listeners to convince me to get off new did not come to fruition. So I did end up bringing new to both my ProQuests this past weekend. I made top 8 both times. The first one, I lost in quarterfinals to a Reaping Blade Florian. Played very, very well. And I do think I had just had the wrong AB loadout. Something I was reflecting on afterwards is I think I need a minimum of AB2. If I knew he was Reaping Blade going in, and I think I was supposed to bring in AB2, because just looking back at that game, he had 7 turns of Millennium Tree, and every single time he swung 2 Rune Chants at me with the tree out, I pitched a blue to AB2 of it. And if I had AB2, I can AB3 out from the 2 Rune Chants, right? I can AB2 the first one is coming for 4, and then AB1 the second one. So it would have saved me 7 points of life, which definitely makes a difference. Instead of being 21 damage I couldn't do anything about, because with 7 turns of tree, it would become 14 damage I can't do anything about. So that was a big reason. But yeah, so lost that one. And then the next day, I made it to the finals, and I did beat a Scepter Florian on the way. And this time, again, I knew he was Scepter, so I brought in AB3, and I think that makes the matchup a lot better, because then the trees only makes 1 Rune Chant every time. I made the finals, and my opponent really wanted the invite, so we agreed to a prize restructuring, and I got a gold foil. And opened it as well. It was well-grounded, so pretty apt for what's happening in the meta right now. What about you? How was your week?
There's a lot of irony in this week in Flesh and Blood, I think. You opened a well-grounded. Spoke about Florian last week in the power of Florian. You beat one on the way to your win. I played 1 ProQuest this past weekend. I only had 1 ProQuest in my area. I got a few more coming up, actually, though. I think you said you've got 1 more. I think there's 5 more in my area, but I can only play 4 of them. So I didn't get my qualification over the weekend. I got the closest you could possibly get, I think, to getting a qualification without being able to do it. I played Scepter Florian, which I think is one of the strongest decks in the format right now, if not the best deck, which we'll get into. I went undefeated all the way to the finals, where I played against a new, ironically enough, as well. Played against a CYB new. I knew they're on CYB, so I played Reaping Blade in the matchup. Had basically a very interesting game where I think my opponent played very well to hide a kind of semi line of a turn, and I ended up losing all my Read the Runes to a Bonds, which I think basically I was like, wow, I just felt like the game was basically over before we even started playing the game, and then that happened and I was like, oh, this is going to be a game now. And then we get to the end game, and I pop off with, I think, like 52 rune chants and a ninth blade, and they're on like 37, so 61 damage, and they have 3 CYBs in graveyard, and their hand is CYB, CYB, 2 blues with a CYB in arsenal, and they live on exactly 1 life.
I see.
With me having basically no cards in deck, so...
I was going to say, it does feel like that matchup, especially the new brings in some healing, is kind of, if they can get some of your threats and heal up to a point where it's actually deterministic that you don't have enough damage. Like, I've been theory crafting from the new side. We'll get more on that on the in the main topic.
But Reaping Blade stops them from healing up.
I don't think... Okay, I'm not sure about full CYB is the thing. I think a few sigils, maybe.
Yeah.
And then... Yeah, so, and then the rest of it is like dedicated towards like trying to get your threats out of your deck. We'll get more into that later.
Got to be presenting threats and damage. I think the biggest thing in that game that made that game winnable for the new was the hitting the read the runes. That was just massive, honestly.
And I think there is tech available in the Mystic Assassin pool to actually help with that more consistent. Actually, I had a bit of that in my list as well. I had some spice in my Lulu list because I do agree with you that Scepter Florian is a very, very strong deck in this meta. It was something I was expecting. I was expecting some flavor of Florian. So I added some spice to my new list, and I have thoughts on that. Like some of it was pretty interesting. Some of it worked well. Some of it I immediately cut after the weekend. But yeah, I mean, that's why we test things, right? I'm glad with some of the stuff I've discovered. But I do want to come back to your, I guess, finals result. Did you all not agree on a prize restructuring beforehand?
No, we both wanted the invite, both wanted the gold foil, so we just played a game of Flesh and Blood. And yeah, it was honestly a good game. So a local of mine who's was at Pro Tour London as well, be off to Pro Tour Singapore. So good to see them get their invite. Yeah, it was definitely. I feel like in the game I felt like I made one misplay, which was pretty costly to me. But then post, I actually think I just also played the game maybe not. Like my macro plan wasn't as ideal as it could have been. So I definitely learned a lot through that game. Learned a lot over the weekend. Played a couple of mirror matches over the weekend. A couple of news as well through that event. So yeah, looking forward to playing some more ProQuest. Not sure what I will play this weekend because there's a lot of things I think happening around in terms of just the format. But I think the Runeblades are particularly strong right now. So I think that's definitely swaying my decision.
Did you play any Auroras?
I did. I played against Aurora in round 2. Matchup kind of went how I've been experiencing the matchup. I mean, to be honest, like I think that game often can be like somewhat close. This one was not particularly close, although they resolved a seal of Imperial Command against me like really early in the game, and that can be really impactful for the combo turn. But just managed to like get far enough ahead that they couldn't set up a combo turn. Had enough had a plow under on a good turn, things like that. So yeah.
So they were trying to arc flicker you, but just
100%.
they couldn't pull it off, basically. Okay.
Got too far ahead.
Cool. Seal of Imperial Command, interesting. That was our 1F in the limited set review, if you remember that.
Yeah, not bad in constructed.
We graded all the cards, and it was the only F. Yeah, I mean, for this meta, yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to the news, we have a preview card coming up. We'll be spoiling that on May 15th, and a bit of a pre-spoiler, the card is insane, so definitely come check it out. And I will not speak any more on it because I might accidentally let slip something.
That's the content creator bingo, though. My card's broken. My card's busted. My card is insane. Wait for our preview. But actually, if you look back at the history of Arsenal Pass preview cards, we got a couple of leagues to stand on some of our preview cards in the past. So we can remind people.
For sure. And continuing on the Arsenal Pass news, the latest replay analysis episode is out. It's live. This one features Michael Hamilton. And his Pro Tour game in London against Pudding Tom's Aurora. So honestly, 2 amazing names battling it out. I mean, I went over his game, and I learned a lot personally, just like having him on and chatting with him about it. So I would highly recommend everyone go check that out if you haven't already. Moving on along, more content. We have, for the official Flesh and Blood channel, has a new weekly series called World Tour Weekly. And it features Margin Bay or Caleb. And the first episode is out. It goes over just stuff that's been happening in the competitive scene in Flesh and Blood, and I really enjoyed the episode, and I'm really looking forward to more of it. Did you manage to check it out, Hayden?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I thought it was awesome. Love seeing LSS support their content creators. First of all, shout out to LSS for that. And yeah, like seeing the collaboration and just seeing these sorts of. I really hope. I was a big back in the day fan of Magic the Gathering's like Mothership, their like main website, where they did a lot of this kind of stuff. They had a lot of, you could go there daily, and you knew daily there was going to be, like, I would every day after school, I would like come home, like jump on the Magic the Gathering website and like, what's new, what articles from like my favorite pro is up there, or like what have they done, deck techs or things like this. So I'm hoping that LSS do more of this in the future.
It does feel like, to your point about supporting content creators, it does feel like a lot of what they do is homegrown in a sense. Mm-hmm. Like even like the trailers, for example, they get the 3 floating guys to like voice a bunch of the stuff and like edit a bunch of the stuff. The Night at the Armory, right? The freaking amazing intro video to Flesh and Blood is the 3 floating guys and Mansand and stuff. So I do want to echo your shout out for them supporting the content creators and giving them opportunities more than just what the content creators are doing themselves. Mm-hmm. More on the news, we have 3 more weeks of ProQuest left, which is like a 5-week ProQuest season total. It feels longer than usual. I feel like normally it's like 4 weeks or 3 weeks maybe even, but this is like a full 5 weeks.
They made the change this year to these 5-week qualifying seasons, and then sort of a slight change to how they're doing skirmishes, less of a fill in the gaps and more of an opportunity to use skirmishes for, I guess, aligning to where they wanted to support in-store play, I think. So I like this. I think there's obviously more stores, there's more regions now, there's more ProQuests. I am interested to see if this changes. We just had the biggest Pro Tour ever, 573 odd players or whatever it was. I think that is that's probably more than LSS one, honestly. I think that's potentially too many players at a Pro Tour invite only event. So I'm interested to see what they do with the ProQuest seasons going forward, because I think this season we have how many ProQuests do we have? 575 ProQuests around the world. Then of course adding on top of that people who have invites from World Tour events, plus potential PTI redemptions, you might start seeing well in excess of 500 people playing the Pro Tour, which
I want to rewind to what you said about perhaps that's a bit too big. I feel like the bigger it gets, the better it is. Do you feel like why do you think they wouldn't want that many people?
I think it just takes the prestige away from it, to be honest. I think, this is the pinnacle of Flesh and Blood, and I think you want it to be the showcase, and if it's easy to qualify, I just think this has been a mindset of James White and of LSS, of like the Pro Tour is the biggest stage and the highest level, and I think if it's too easy to qualify, I think that can maybe take away some of that prestige. That's just my view. I'm not sure. I can't say exactly that LSS share that view or anyone particular LSS shares that view, but I think if I look back at like Magic went through this at one point as well, other TCGs I think have gone through this at points, and so it's definitely a balancing act. Whether that number is actually bigger than that, it might be, right? Like the game gets big enough, it's like you want to scale with the game anyway, right? So that it's, if you've doubled the player base and your first ever Pro Tour was 200 players, then 400 players makes sense. If you triple it, 600 might make sense. It's just relative. I'm just curious if it's starting to get too big and potentially. Also, remember they're paying for all these people to be playing, right? Like they're paying for the product, they're paying for the allocation of players being in a large event hall without necessarily getting a return from those players. So there's other factors in there, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think we could have I like the Pro Tour London size, and I think it could get bigger as the game is growing as well, because I'm not entirely sure if it's easier to qualify given that there are more players as well, right? So I think that just overall lifts everyone's skill level up, and I'm not entirely sure if there's more ProQuests, if it's necessarily easier. It would be if the player base was the same and then you just added more ProQuests, but the player base is also growing, and then now there's more ProQuests, so it feels like it could be, the skill level could be maintained.
It could be a regional thing though as well, right? Like where are your ProQuests growing? That's also quite interesting. So if your player base grows by 10%, but your ProQuests or effective qualification slots grow by 25%, for instance, then is it like for like? Whereas if it's like, it's growing because we've added it all to Brazil and Japan and these sorts of things, then sure, makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of more where I was going at. Or more like, I mean, they have all the data for like Armory attendance and even previous ProQuest attendance, right? So then they're like, oh, in this region, the ProQuest attendance has shot up by like 10%. Let's give them one more ProQuest. And I feel like that doesn't necessarily mean those ProQuests are easier. So yeah, I feel like the Pro Tour growing is, yeah, I'm down for that. Totally down. I think it was really exciting to be like, we have the biggest Pro Tour, and it'll be cool if you can keep saying that for the next few Pro Tours as well. Next, there's also a Project Blue announcement, which was a little bit under the radar. It didn't quite... Yeah, it was a little bit like, I was just like seeing these like screenshots and no official thing about it. From what I understand, it's like a in-between Commoner and Blitz sort of format, which I think is really, really cool. It's very similar to the Clash format, the fan-made Clash format that Mansant made a few years ago, where you get to play commons and rares, and you don't get to play like the legendary equipment, which are definitely balanced around like a 40 health format, and you don't get to run like the insane Majestics as well, which are similarly balanced around having a 40 health format. So I'm super looking forward to this sort of being a new casual play experience and a new stepping stone for people to get into the game.
Yeah, I think there's a good reason they've kept it with a very soft launch. It's very much alpha testing stage. It's going to be kept only within, support-wise anyway, only within New Zealand for the next few months while they do Armory testing. They have a couple of events, one including a side event at New Zealand Nationals. They've done some exclusive promos for it. I think that the whole purpose of that is to help drive people to actually try this format because they need feedback on it. And then I'm sure that promo will be available for the format in a wider capacity as you move forward into this format, moving through its next testing stages and then eventually into rollout. But I think the whole thing for keeping it a little bit more low-key is it might not pan out, right? Like this format might not play out exactly how they want it to. They're using it more of a testing ground. They've established this kind of division within LSS, which is this Legend Story Labs piece, which is about testing new formats, trialing new formats, trying more innovative ways to approach Flesh and Blood, which honestly is really cool. I think get ahead of it, right? Get ahead of this next step in the evolution of Flesh and Blood as a game, especially we know that the casual side of the game and the more entry, beginner-friendly side of the game needs support. It needs this kind of sort of body to help get it off the ground and kickstart it. So yeah, I just shout out to this because I think it's very cool. The format itself, I mean, I know a couple of my friends in New Zealand are like checking it out, going to go play a few events, have been sort of theory crafting, and there's a few content creators out there who've put a few things out on the format already as well. So yeah, very interesting to see what comes of this format. I am someone who either likes really high-powered things or really low-powered things. So I like the idea of a potentially like really powered-down Blitz format where you might get into these really interesting deck-building decisions, more grindy game states, for instance, even at 20 health. So yeah, I think it's cool.
Should we move on to the Command and Cookout?
Yep, let's go on to the Command and Cookout. If you want to get your questions in for the Command and Cookout, you can do so. You can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Drop a comment in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it is a Command and Cookout question. You can, if you're an Arsenal Pass patron, drop it in our Patreon Discord. We have a channel there for those questions. Or if you want to do like Xavier has done here, give us a note. Give us your question at a local event and or a PT calling, etc., and we will get them on the show. This question comes from a local of yours, Pankaj. The question is, forgot to ask my Command and Cookout question before you left, so I'm assuming they sent it to you. Since it appears that Necromancer will be a board state-based class like Illusionist, how do you think LSS will approach making the class unique when it comes to making and maintaining a board state? Xavier.
Yep, this one came from Xavier Hines, local of mine, plays a lot of Wizard. But yeah, at first,
it makes sense,
I thought that at first I thought the Necromancer allies wouldn't be permanent. That was my initial thought before they spoiled the Necromancer allies. When we were told Necromancer's coming, and I was like, similar question, right? Just like, ooh, how will this not be Illusionist? So I was picturing like Insidious Chill, but like allies, where you can get use out of them, like probably attack with them 2 or 3 times and they go away on their own. But because they're allies, the opponent can also interact with them. That was my initial take for how they would make it unique from Illusionist. Clearly, that doesn't seem to be the case. So I think now the uniqueness is going to come from not being able to go as wide as Illusionists. Like, Dromai and OG Prism could like swing out the entire board. And even now, like Enigma could also, after fulfilling certain conditions, could go pretty wide, right? Like Mirror Guy into like other stuff. And New Prism, not as wide as the others. Like, there's no like infinite number of wideness, but still goes somewhat wide, right? A Herald Angel and then another Herald, for example. And I think the Necromancer uniqueness is probably going to be, when it comes to attacking, probably just one, maybe two allies in a turn, and the rest of the reward for having a wide board state would be from the tap ability, where they can use those allies for other things other than attacking. So in that sense, I think that's where the uniqueness comes in, where they won't be going as wide.
Yeah, I think I think the easiest way is to strip it back and say, like, what are the unique features of Illusionist, right? When it comes to how Illusionists play. So you've got a couple of things, right? You've obviously got the ally aspect, which we've seen in different iterations with Dromai, of course, now with the Angels with New Prism. But then you've also got the aura, like the specific aura piece, which is creation of auras, and then being enabled to use those with different weapons that we've seen in the game. Of course, original Luminaris being the kind of catalyst of what that could look like at its most powerful, right? Alongside Spectral Shields and other auras. And then you kind of have the Phantasm aspect as well, right? So you've got this another aspect of what is unique to being an Illusionist in the form of Phantasm. So those are unique pieces of an Illusionist. And then I think what's interesting is that ally, I think you've got to divorce what an ally is from the unique aspects of that class. So then if you take the ally as itself an aspect, which is about having this onboard piece that has a presence of its own, that has to be dealt with in of its own right, that is the ally sort of identity. And then you look at, okay, well, what's the pirate and what's the necromancer identity? And ideally those should be, their very own unique things. What is it makes a pirate? Is it around treasure, gold, these things? What is it that makes a necromancer specifically? It's about graveyard interaction. It's about resurrection. It's about these things. Okay, then how does a pirate necromancer interact with allies specifically? Because allies we could see in other classes, other heroes in the future of Flesh and Blood. I mean, not forget, we've seen allies in Brute. We've seen them in Runeblade before.
And Warrior.
In Warrior. So it's not like they're unique to specifically the Illusionist class. I think they're just so tied to the Illusionist class because obviously the impact they've had on the history of the game, Dromai, Prism now as well. In terms of like that, how this will differ, I think you kind of said it, right? It's just, I just really want to reiterate the difference between what an ally is in Illusionist and what an ally could be in Necromancer. And it really comes down to, in my view, what does a Necromancer do? That is the key. So what role does an ally play in that? Does it help you enable the rest of your game plan as a Necromancer? Does it help you to... So, for instance, I'm looking at Chum, Friendly First Mate, has Watery Grave. So as an ally, a means to an end for another piece of Necromancer's game plan. Is it kind of like, yeah, you do... Now, allies, naturally, their identity might be about utilizing chain links, right? But how many chain links can Necromancer actually utilize, to your point? If you look at Prism with the Angels and the current setup that Prism has, it does have multiple chain links, but it's kind of limited, right? Because of the weapon versus, something in the past like Dromai or even old Prism with Spectral Shield. So, yeah, that's what I'm kind of looking for. I think that Necromancer piece is really what's going to decide how it plays out relative to the Illusionists. But I think what I really do believe is that the ally in of itself is the unique aspect. So allies, I wouldn't expect allies to play too differently necessarily in of themselves in a vacuum, but when combined with what the rest of the hero of the class does, that's where it becomes interesting to me into what their role is.
I think the resource piece of it is also something that could potentially make it unique. Like you spoke about Necromancer having graveyard interaction. I think that's the other part that maybe sets them apart. Like Dromai to create the ash to create allies needed ash.
Exactly.
Prism needed her figments, whereas Necromancer very much needs graveyard fill for them to do the thing and get the allies. So that's potentially another difference as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
While we're here, I want to just soft tangent a little bit into the discussion of allies in general. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we will come back to this once we have more Necromancer cards and we're actually talking about Gravy Bones. But do you have thoughts on allies in general in terms of how they fit into the game system? And actually, I'll start here. I'm a little bit just nervous about the ally mechanic in general. Because something that I felt when Dromai came out, and there was a class that was fully about allies. It wasn't just a little splash of allies here and there with like Shadow Brute and Shadow Runeblade and stuff. It felt like there were a lot of other cards in the game that were not updated in a sense. I'm sort of using like software engineering or like a digital game language here. But like the rest of the game didn't seem to get patched to the introduction of a fully ally-based class. And specifically what I mean is there are a whole bunch of like heavy hitters heroes, right? There's like the clash mechanic, the wage mechanic. None of that works with allies. Riptide's traps don't work with allies. Even a card like Hold the Line, even when Dromai got her Tome, she draws cards. Hold the Line, you play it on a dragon, you don't get the prevention effect. And I think the clearest example of this was the wizard cards, right? They literally basically reprinted a whole bunch of wizard cards in Uprising that were the same as previous wizard cards, but just said any target instead, to sort of patch them to work with allies. But I'm not sure if the rest of the game got that same treatment, and that is something that makes me a little bit nervous with a full ally-based class coming back in.
Yeah, I think it depends how you look at it, right? Like, so you can go the other way as well, right? And say, did they always know they'd have allies in the game, and was it a case of balancing some of those cards? So, instance on the flip side, an on-hit effect, right? So all the or majority of the on-hit effects, and let's just say hits a hero, which some do, but some just say when this hits, right? So I believe like Snatch says that, for instance, right? Snatch is just on hit, draw a card, whereas something like Icy Encounter, which is in a later set, is when this hits a hero, create a Frostbite token. Obviously, it goes under the hero's control. So I think it's relevant to the templating in terms of how they look at hero versus just dealing damage. My view is they've kind of always known that this would be a thing, and while I don't think they've done a perfect job, to your thing about maybe having the right engineering around the game to support, I do also think that we don't need everything to interact with allies. And I feel that, like, personally, just going back to the original base of the question, like, I like allies in the game. I think I want different aspects to my game when it comes to a card game. Like, I want different resource bases. So, I'm really interested in what Necromancer is going to look like, for instance, to use that graveyard as a resource. I'm interested in, for instance, when we had Ash as a resource. Like, I'm interested in these different types of resources. I'm interested in different ways of the game and having allies. But I agree, like, you've got to find a balance point. And at times, if I look at something like the Dromai aspect, yeah, maybe that was the time we lived through where allies were really powerful and they went really wide and they kind of dominated in that way. Maybe then we go to a space in this format where it's like, yes, allies exist, but they're more of a kind of middle ground in the game. And then maybe you have some allies in the future where it's like they don't play as much of a role. Like we've maybe had a little bit in the past, but maybe we see them again in a kind of very minimal way. So I think it's just about an ebb and flow of the game. I think it's fair enough to be worried about like, are we just going to get a repeat of Dromai? I think that's not going to be the case, but yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify, what I was speaking about earlier was not a power level related thing. It was literally a mechanic related thing.
Sure.
And to your point, I also agree with you, actually, that I do like the concept of having different resource bases and allies coming to the game. To your point, you want different systems in the game. I think that's cool. I like that too. But the point I was coming to was that it didn't feel as integrated into the rest of the system because of the number of things that just didn't work with it. So, like, yes, I like new systems in the game, but I want the other stuff to still be able to interact with it. Like, I didn't like that, you're playing Victor into Dromai, you don't have a hero ability. You're playing Riptide into Dromai, half your hero ability is completely turned off because you trap an ally and nothing happens, even though the allied go again or whatever. Victor can't clash with, like, those allies. Bunch of wizard cards just, like, can't even target them. That's what I mean, where it feels like the concept of having a class with a different resource base, a different way of engaging with the game is cool, but something that I feel was missed a little bit the last time was other stuff didn't feel like it got updated to deal with the new stuff. And then it was like, wait, a whole bunch of heroes just don't have abilities, don't have cards that deal with this, because it's like it's normally a hero-based game and suddenly there's allies around. was kind of like what I was coming at. It wasn't a power level related thing. It was a mechanic related thing.
I think to go off that, like obviously they can't go back and patch cards, right, to that point. So I think, to your point about that, like as you say, it's not a digital card game, right? So that wouldn't be the case. But I also think that actually having things that don't interact is perfectly fine. I think the hero ability is a watch out for me. Like if your actual hero ability becomes almost null and void because of a situation of what is now a function in the game and quite a potentially popular function, I think that can be a problem. If it's card specific, I think Wizard is like the perfect balance, to be honest. You have cards that can target and cards that don't target. Like I actually think that's a really good balance, for instance. But on some of the things like, if my deck, my whole identity of my hero is to clash, then I don't think that is Wager. Actually, I think Wager is the worst. Like I think if that's your whole identity, like that is not a good spot to be in. So when it comes to the hero ability, but when it comes to like the cards themselves, so on hit hero versus on hit, or maybe hold the line, for instance, in the interaction, I'm actually okay with the specific cards. I actually think that's kind of good. I think that's kind of just, I like that kind of design, but the hero piece is the watch out for me. So yeah.
Cool. Continuing this topic of interaction, should we move on and talk about Runeblades?
Yeah, let's get into the main topic of the pod this week. And, there's a few things happening around Flesh and Blood right now when it comes to Class Constructed. We have Aurora. I mean, what we might we'll start with the Class Constructed wins from ProQuest Season 2, but we've got some questions around Aurora this week, potentially Living Legend. We've got the remainder of ProQuest Seasons to talk about. And then we've got, some discourse around just how strong Runeblade is right now in this meta. Let's talk first of all Class Constructed wins from Week 2 of ProQuest Season. Of course, Week 1 was a very different meta as we saw Enigma continue to dominate its way out of Flesh and Blood into Living Legend, along with Zen creeping over the line. And Aurora has just continued to go from strength to strength. Last week, 47 wins in ProQuest, taking it to 916, I believe it is, Living Legend points. Florian also putting up a number of wins, 32 for reference. Nu had the third most at 18, and then we have a real drop off into the single digits with Arachne at 8, Jarl at 6, Kano, Prism, etc. So combined, our Runeblades last week, Aurora and Florian, were 50% of the wins at ProQuest last week. Just looking at the graph, might even be slightly more based on the numbers
slightly over.
Yeah, 146 in week 2, and it won, what's that,
79.
So yeah, like to your point, just over nearly 60% of the wins last week. And yeah, like I say, that puts now Aurora needing just 29 wins this coming week in ProQuest week 3 to Living Legend, out of a very similar number of ProQuests happening this week. We had 146 ProQuest events in week 2. We have 142 in week 3. So if Aurora even has, a 30% drop in wins this week, it's still going to achieve Living Legend this coming weekend. So it feels like it's all but done deal that Aurora's going to Living Legend this weekend.
Does seem that way. And we did actually go over this in the main pod last week. And actually, we also covered this in the Patron pod, talking about Runeblades in general, actually. So, people haven't signed up for that, definitely go sign up for that. We have some interesting thoughts there as well. So, yeah, looking like Runeblade dominance is continuing. And I believe in the Living Legend leaderboard as well, it is, if you sum up the points of all the different classes that have gotten like points over the years, Runeblade is at the top as well, and it seems to be continuing. Yep. Should we just move on and talk about Runeblades in general?
I just want to recap on maybe the ProQuest Week 2 wins, just to talk a little bit about some of the other impacts as well. So if Aurora was to go this weekend, Florian seems to be, it's had the second most wins in ProQuest Week 2. I think the discourse around Florian as well is fairly strong, as it being one of the top 2 decks in the format right now. Nu is quite interesting because Nu picked up 18 wins last week, and actually now sitting 62 wins for the ProQuest season, away from Living Legend. It's not impossible for that Nu in the last week of ProQuest season Living Legend. So 3 more weeks left. The ProQuest numbers do drop off after next week. There's only 110 in week 4 and only 90 in week 5. But if Aurora was to Living Legend, and we assume that some heroes, depending on the complexion of the meta once Aurora Living Legends shake out, Nu could pick up potentially some of that Aurora win share, and find itself by the final week of ProQuest very near touching distance of hitting Living Legend as well, at which point we would say farewell to all of MST. And I believe would be the second, behind Tails Varia, second set that we say goodbye to all of the heroes from. which would be quite interesting, considering it was a set that only came out last year.
Yeah, that's a big question, right? Like, what happens after Aurora leaves? That will totally dictate whether New also follows suit soon after. I do worry we might end up in a similar position as like Zen did a few months ago, where a weekend before the PT, we don't actually know if he's legal or not. I wonder whether the same thing might happen with New as it comes to national season.
Yeah, potentially.
Exactly.
That's the next follow-on effect.
I'm not entirely sure what the battle hardened schedule is like as it leads up to US Nationals. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like at least one or two. There's one at least 2 weekends before, and maybe even one like the literal weekend before.
And just nationals in
I wouldn't
general.
Be surprised if that's the case.
Of course, for people, right?
Exactly.
Like nationals.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah. Even throughout national season, yeah, you could have some nationals where it's like New is legal, and some nationals where New isn't legal.
Yeah, we can talk just
that'll
quickly.
be the big thing.
Quickly, battle hardened. So you've got this coming weekend. We have what do we have this coming weekend? We've got battle hardened Minneapolis. This coming weekend, which is that class constructed. I'm going to check quickly. It looks like it is class constructed, so at ProQuest Plus as well. So we'll have some impact there. And then you've got Battle Hardened Tokyo in 2 weeks' time, the final week of ProQuest season. Also Battle Hardened Milan that weekend, Battle Hardened Hartford that weekend as well. And then, of course, we go to the world premiere of High Seas. And then very quickly after that is there's no more battle hardens there. So you get a couple of weeks of clarity before at least US Nationals. I think what the bigger impact is going to be is those other national championships, particularly in that first and second week of national season post the US Nationals, and Las Vegas calling will be the most interesting thing.
Yeah. So Hartford is the last CC thing, May 16 to 18. So yeah, that's like that's actually no, that's
the last week of
like
ProQuest season
weeks-ish.
as well. So at the end of ProQuest season,
okay.
we are going to know. We are going to know whether New is living legend for US Nationals. But then I think everyone playing US Nationals is in a good spot. It's the players who are playing Nationals in week 2, 3, 4, and 5 that might be a little bit less in the know.
If New hasn't LL'd, if New has LL'd, then everyone's
fine.
chilling. Yeah, then everyone's fine.
We're in a completely new meta with High Seas and exactly.
Yeah, if New is around and hasn't LL'd, then post the people whose nationals are after US Nationals are probably in a similar spot as like for PT London if people are playing Zen.
Can we see
except this will probably be more impactful because New, I think New is going to have more of an impact than like Zen did.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Can we set the scene a little bit? Aurora, Florian, nearly 60% of the win share of ProQuest in week 2. Do we agree that these are the two best decks in the format right now?
I agree with Aurora being the best deck in the format. Florian, I'm still with Aurora being the other best deck, and I think you have different thoughts on this. I mean, I think combo Aurora is favored into Florian. I'm not going to say beats it up every time, but I do think the full combo package with the triple exudes and everything is favored into Florian. You might have different thoughts, but for that reason, you know what? Actually, short answer, yes, these two are the best decks currently, but I do think Florian is a step down from Aurora, where I'd just be like, Aurora is the best deck would be the statement I feel is more true in a sense. Okay. Like, to me, Florian is firmly second to Aurora.
Sure.
So the statement, these are the top two decks, it's true, but it seems a little misleading because it might imply they're on the same level, but to me, Aurora is a step higher.
Okay. Whereas I think for me, they're fairly close, and I think Florian is so much better than the third best deck in the format that like there's a big gulf between these top two decks for me right now and the rest of the meta. Like, I also think a big part of that is Florian just super polices a lot of what the decks that want to target Aurora are doing, which is quite interesting to me. Like, I don't think there's... I've been searching this week. I don't think there's a particularly good angle to be beating both of these heroes right now, in my view, where I feel like you can consistently be like, I'm favored into both these heroes. I think that's a challenge. Also, I think both the we'll speak about this in terms of some of the strengths of Runeblade, but just the flexibility that these two heroes have right now. Aurora's is, I think, more known because we've seen it for longer in terms of the ability to just be an out-and-out aggro deck, plus this ability to play more of a combo aggro plan with Flicker, Arc Lightning Flicker, and then also Florian does that, but is maybe a little bit less known quantity, although it's now becoming quite clear of just how strong Scepter is. And I think now actually what happens with Florian is you move into this hybrid Florian era, which would be quite interesting. You know what vibes Florian is giving me? It's giving me Viscerai vibes, where it's maybe slightly less aggro leaning, slightly more setup leaning, but in the very similar
sort of spot in the meta where he's threatening to do both, and you as a deck, if you want to combat it, need to somehow have a viable plan against whichever strategy he's going to employ into you, which is just a very tough ask for a lot of decks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's why I'm drawn to Florian. It's the kind of game plan I like. I actually think, I'm not going to say Florian is stronger than Viscerai was, because I don't think that's true, but I do think Florian's more consistent, which is quite interesting. Because that was one of my gripes with Viscerai towards the end, especially around Worlds meta. I was like, this deck is so inconsistent into what the meta is trying to do. Mm-hmm. But Florian, I think, is finding itself in a softer meta. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Florian has a lower ceiling than Viscerai did, but a higher floor, I think, might be the way to put it. And also seems to have almost better setup than Viscerai, probably because he blocks better, right? So it comes back to a consistency piece. It does feel like he just can do Viscerai's setup better than Viscerai did. Suffers a little bit on the if he needs to go full aggro leaning. Not suffers a little, suffers a fair bit. Suffers a lot if he needs to do that, but he just doesn't need to right now.
And Channel Millennium Tree is a heck of a card, which I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of some of the ways to combat this hero right now.
Yeah, and actually I do think that's some other aspect of it, which I think is very, very important, is I think people are now learning the known quantity that is Florian, and in particular when it comes to AB loadouts. I think as people adapt, I'm curious to see Florian's dominance. I think for now we're still seeing a lot of people thinking they can just bring AB1 into Florian. And I think particularly if you know the Scepter, you can't bring AB1 anymore. You need to have more than that. And I do wonder how that sort of knowledge, as it propagates, how it changes Florian's matchup spread and his prominence.
Yeah, I think it also changes what Florians do as well, because I'm definitely
exactly
about this weekend of like, if I'm expecting my opponents to bring AB3 into me, I'm also ready for that. So
yeah, exactly. I actually think we're in a very fascinating point right now where we haven't settled. There is flux going on right now in Florian's becoming a known quantity. People are going to figure out how to adapt to it, and Florian's going to adapt back, because I'm seeing a lot of conversations where people are like, oh, we'll just run this into Florian. And I'm like, you all know Florian's allowed to adapt too, right? So what if Florian start doing this? And then what do you do? If you've already committed, like, I don't know, like your equipment loadout to this, or you're putting Remembrance in your deck to like combat this, and then Florian suddenly turns around and is like playing like more offensive into you, like, and you've got Remembrance in your deck to bring back your whatever you think is going to help you. And it's like I'm very, very interested to see how the strategies adapt to each other, and whether we settle into okay, this is now how the matchup is, or do we end up in a spot that sort of used to happen with Dash back in the day, where you sit across a Dash and you just need to guess whether they're setup Dash or whether they're aggro Dash, and you can maybe have a hedge board to play for either, but they could very well be on either one. So whether we're going to end up with that on Florian, or whether we're going to end up on okay, this is the way Florian is played and it's a little bit more known.
There's a third option, and I think it's a real reality, which is that it actually doesn't come down to cards so much, but down to flexibility of the way you play the game and how you set up your game plans. I think in Flesh and Blood right now, we have a few, especially these talented classes, because of the access to their card pool, I think, as well. They have this real ability to flex between how they play games. And I think we're just getting better as a collective of Flesh and Blood players at understanding how to play games of Flesh and Blood and adapt game plans to, we spoke the other week about like people even using the concept of intentionally IPing themselves to like gain advantage in a game state, which is something people wouldn't have done in the past. And I think, particularly with like these Earth heroes, they just have such an array of cards. They have different ways they can play the game because they're operating on an axis of not just offense and defense, but like they're utilizing a resource base of like, I need to decompose, I need to fill my graveyard, do I not need to do that to finish my banish zone, etc. So I do also think there's a third option, which I felt was a real reality playing games with Florian last week, and just games with Earth Heroes in general, honestly, of actually I can change how I play this game significantly with the 80 cards that I already registered.
When you say, I mean, the 80 cards part, I think that makes sense, but I think, just to be clear, it sounds like you're saying it's more than just the sideboard. Like it's more than just you present your deck a certain configuration to change your strategy. It sounds like you're saying during the game itself.
Correct.
You have presented a certain 60, but that same 60 lets you enact two very different game plans.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's both. So definitely you can still have a lot to say because of the card pool during deck construction and also sideboarding. But then actually within the game, how you decide to play the game and the ways that you... Like I think in the past, if I look at a hero, you spoke about dash, right? It's like, okay, if I side buy items in to play dash, like there's a chance that maybe I can actually still play aggressively and like boost away my items, etc. But I think for the most part, you're kind of locked into that game plan of what you're going to do with your items. And I think that's just, that's the example that I think Florian, and I think Verdance actually has a bit of that as well. Doesn't need to fall into. And Aurora, honestly, Aurora has that as well.
Yeah, although I do think I agree with you on the Aurora side. I mean, she can bring in Flicker Wisp when she still plays aggressively, kind of thing. Yeah. But I think the equipment part and the weapon part does sort of lock you in a little bit more. Like I think Florian
can do.
I've been seeing more and more Florian lists that have Scepter and Reaping Blade, right? Like they have both weapons, and then the weapon that you actually choose to present. Like yes, you can still flex a little bit, but it does.
Definitely can.
It does leave you open, vulnerable to certain things, and I'm just very interested to see how everyone else adapts and tries to punish or take advantage of whatever weapon the Florian chooses to present. But I do think that is a post-Aurora conversation, though. That is once Aurora is gone, then we'll see more of that. And for now, everyone still needs to be thinking a lot about Aurora.
Well, I think if you want to win a ProQuest this weekend, you've got to be thinking about both Aurora and Florian. I think you can't
Agreed.
not. So either you play one of those two heroes, or you have to be very cognizant of how you're going to beat both those heroes. I think if you want to win a ProQuest this weekend. So
yeah. All right, should we go on and talk about generic Runeblade stuff?
Sure. Start with split damage.
Yeah. So yep.
I think we did a lot of this in the Patreon pod, right? So if you're a patron, obviously you can go and check that out. But I think the TLDR is like right now. Split damage is really strong in this format, and typically it kind of is strong, but I think especially when you don't have good ways to split defensive resources and you don't have illusionists that can cover up split damage really well in a format, I think split damage gets even more impactful personally.
I want to go a little bit further. It's more than just on the turn-to-turn cycle basis of, like, to your point about defensive resources. Like, you always need to give up, like, 2 cards if you're trying to cover up, like, an Arcanic Shockwave or something. Not counting, like, a Tunic counter, I suppose. But it's also the fact that you had to give up an equipment piece to even think about interacting with it in the first place. And that often represents a lot of lost damage that feels like it isn't fully represented or accounted for on the Runeblade cards. Because something that I keep thinking about is in some of the dev talks, they've spoken about how with Warrior, like the fact that weapons start on the field and are strong, and because of that, they had to sort of impose a bit of a tax on Warrior cards to say that, hey, you know, your Warrior cards, like 3 is too small a number, it feels like, but 4 is too big of a number. And so they just settled on giving a lot of Warrior cards just like 3, like as a power level. But for Runeblade, it feels like the same thing didn't happen, where it's like the Runeblade cards are allowed to just be at 4, even though they have a sort of reverse aspect of making your opponent's equipment loadout quite a bit worse, because they need to bring in a piece of AB to interact with you. Like, for example, Ira, right? She can't go like full aggro. She can't be like Syndra, which just be like, okay, I'm just gonna AB 0 and try and race you. She needs to have a piece of AB. And so she gives up Pouncing Paws to bring in Tide Flippers. And that's like a lot of lost damage for the Ira. And like that's the other aspect of it, right? It's more than just the turn-to-turn cycle. It's difficult to fully block out split damage. It's also that my hero is already a little bit weaker because I had to give up an equipment piece.
I'm curious what the Runeblade cards are that aren't paying that kind of tax though. Like, which are the ones that are like 0 for 4s in Runeblade? Like
Arcanic Shockwave.
Right, but it's a conditional, like more than 0 for 4. Yes. Right, it doesn't have go again. But, it's not like a 0 for 4 like with go again, for instance, right?
So conditional 0 for 5s are fine, right? Conditional 0 for 5s, like, yeah, that like many classes have that. I mean, E-Strike is literally a conditional 0 for 5. But this is a conditional split 0 for 5. And it doesn't feel like it has that additional, like, it's just conditional split 0 for 5. Like, that's it. Like, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't have an additional, like, drawback, given that it has a strict advantage of being split.
Okay. I'm trying to think of other cards to compare it to that others have access to. Because then a lot of these cards I'm trying to compare it to have go again. So I'd say, like, they're paying a damage for their go again. So I feel like I'd have to go away and do some more research on that. Like it doesn't quite like if I think about like an arrow, for instance, I'd be like Endless Arrow is a 0/4 that has an on hit to get the card back, but it pays for it by being an arrow. But how much of that is a downside versus that's just how the class interacts? Because a lot of Runeblade cards need to have the build between non-attack action and attack actions to operate, and they don't have natural go again, for instance. So whereas you spoke about Ninja before, as a class, like they have a lot of natural go again on their cards. So I think it's the value of these effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do wonder what the part of it is also. It does feel like Aurora and Florian, despite being Runeblades, do seem to have moved away from the needing strict ratios to like have their stuff work. And because of that, they've reached a level of consistency, which is maybe what leads them to being this strong, right? Because I think it might be a bit of a misnomer to just be like, oh, Runeblades are too good right now in general, and then Vincent is sitting there not being too good. But that's because her hero ability literally says non-attack on it. Like, her hero ability and the other cards sort of force her into having some sort of ratio which introduces a level of inconsistency in her that maybe makes it a little bit more fair. Maybe that's where the tax comes in for her having split damage. Whereas Aurora and Florian feel like, because they're a little more liberated from needing strict ratios of certain sense, you're starting to see they just have split damage and they don't quite have the level of inconsistency that warrants them having a stronger offense, like a stronger mode of attack in the form of split damage.
I guess their ratios come in the form of elemental cards, right? So lightning, earth cards, how they have to play those, and the fact that those cards are typically underrated. You're not going to get the 3 block earth cards. You're not going to get the offensive lightning cards that you might want that's going to fit quite that power level. So you have to find the ways to fit them in. One card I thought of as an example of like a conditional 0 for 5 that has split damages. Infect. That was quite an interesting card to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The condition being tied to an on hit though is quite a different condition though. I would say, like,
but it doesn't require it doesn't require a card, right? So I think it's just about. I think my understanding is like, what's the balance of like requiring 2 cards? So you spoke about E-Strike, right? For instance, requires 2 cards. Spoke about was Arcanic Shockwave you're speaking about, like requires 2 cards and requires a specific card, which I was talking about, the lightning and the earth cards maybe being a penalty for playing those heroes. So you have to have a lightning card. How the lightning card is already a penalty for being in your deck. So I think that's kind of the areas I compare it to. I'm not saying they're like for like, and I'm not saying that it doesn't mean that it helps these Runeblades find this little bit of an additional consistency or power, but I think that is what is tying to them in terms of the split damage.
Mm-hmm. Should we move on and talk about setup a little bit? Because I think that's the other thing that's, at least in Florian's case,
I think to me that's the biggest thing. I think to me that's the biggest thing.
That's exactly. It's the Viscerai thing all over again, right? Like his strength was the fact that he can just like set up onto you and ask you, like put the opponent on a clock in a sense, or sort of go ebb and flow between, I'm just going to ask you to convert full 5-card hands, and then 2 turns later, I'm going to ask you to defend my 25 damage, because that's when I choose like pop off a little bit, send a 9th later at you, which like with like 10 rune chance, and then just do that cycle, which is very difficult for people to deal with. That is, I will say, not Runeblade. Like that's not something all Runeblades have, right? Like Aurora doesn't have it. Vincent, maybe Vincent a little bit, but it's just a little bit more inconsistent for her. And she sort of takes Blood Dead while doing it. Whereas Florian just feels like he's just setting up, and then your opponent needs to like try and convert 5 cards somehow. Well,
here's a hero ability that's tied to rune chance, right? I think that, and like Viscerai, I think that's the commonality they have there. I think on the setup piece, Aurora definitely has this setup piece, right? Obviously, it has like the Flicker Wisp, Arc Lightning combo element in terms of a setup to punch big damage. So I think it can also flex between playing an aggressive, like we were just talking about before, in terms of an aggro deck. Where do they gain their additional points of value to be the deck that you play? So if Aurora's the aggro deck of choice, like why is it? Well, Dash.io is a better damage dealing deck, I think, but Aurora has the versatility and the ability to be less susceptible to being fatigued, for instance. It has these other points to it. It has this setup. Okay, Dash.io can also have these kind of setups, but it has this resilience that maybe Dash.io doesn't. Syndra 5 presents smaller attacks. It's harder to defend out the damage across multiple chain links, but they don't have the same, again, resiliency towards a deck actually racing them, or quite the same level of just pure output. So I think, that kind of element of the semi-combo aspect, or the ability to set up into these like big pseudo 6 or 7 card turns that Aurora can do is what gives it that power.
I will say, I wouldn't call Aurora's combo a setup, though. I mean, that's just having an arsenal, in a sense. Like, that's not any more setup than any other class has access to. You know what I'm saying? Whereas the Viscera or the Florian part of it is actual setup, in the sense that you're actually saving damage on the board for the following turns.
Okay,
like
sure. I think it's fine. It depends how you define setting something up. Because I would say setting up a piece of arsenal and setting up maybe an Imperial Seal, or setting up an Embodiment of Lightning, or setting up a rune chant for a future turn would still be set up. But I think what you're talking about is like you're you're saving damage. Like you're effectively accumulating damage to send on another turn. And I think the only two classes that can really do that, actually there's 3, I guess, but the 2 that do it primarily are Runeblade and Illusionist. Although
I would put Wizard in that as well, actually. I do think almost every Wizard has had some aspect of, like, there are certain
potions
strategies that they enact. Well, I mean, if you think about Icelander, like Frost Axes and Insidious Shields, I would put that under they are setting up to do their Frost Axe combo on you, right? It doesn't just it does involve a few.
I think that's
parts
the
that
setup
I'm
kind of talking about as well. As opposed to just like purely
Acilio as well,
damage.
like Acilio as well with a bunch of sigils.
Again, setup. I agree. Yep, setup. I think that's exactly. It depends how you define like setup versus like holding damage versus, because I would say Guardian's the other class, but no one's going to be playing that strategy.
But I would say, like, for example, like the sigils, or like the Insidious Shields and the Frost, that's all more than just having an arsenal, in a sense. And Aurora's combo just feels more akin to there's Arsenal combo piece.
I think it's semantics. I think it's a sliding scale, and they're all somewhere along that standpoint. Because I think right now for Aurora to be successful, like you aren't just looking for just a Flicker Wisp and then you draw the Arc Lightning. Like you do need some other cards to go along with that. You often need access. Like even, for instance, even part of that setup is deciding to play Crown of Dominion, so that you have the gold available on board for your combo turn. So it comes in. I think it comes in different forms.
Yeah, and you can't draw like instants with like your Arc Flicker thing. I want to come back to the resilience part of it that you're talking about, because something that we'd be remiss not to also talk about is their fridge, right? Purgatory and Carapace and Grasp, and then like 1 block on the boots for like Aurora's Greaves, and Florian has like Florian's well grounded, but there is Spellbound Creepers, so there's like 4 Runeblade equipment pieces that all block. I mean, I guess Spellbound Creepers is just fancy Iron Rod most of the time, but like Purgatory, Grasp, and Carapace are just incredible pieces of fridge that they also have. You spoke about like the ninjas earlier, where it's like, and you spoke about how they're not as resilient, or like Dash.io, and a big part of it is also they just don't have the same level of fridge that Runeblades get.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of just the reality of it right now in this format. That's the strength that they're deriving. So, yeah,
cool.
You want to talk about what happens post Aurora?
Let's do that.
Where's your head at post Aurora? Let's just say we feel Aurora is going to live in Legend this weekend. If that's all but done and dusted, we enter next week. Of course, we'll have results from this weekend, which is going to help us tell a bit of a story about what happens around Florian in particular, New potentially as well, and what that's been doing this weekend. But if we were to say roughly the metagame looks something similar to what it did last weekend, what do you think happens next?
I predict a triangle. Triangle between the 2 Rosetta Earth heroes and the 1 remaining MST hero. Particularly, I think it's Florian, Verdance, and New, where Florian beats New beats Verdance, and Verdance beats Florian. That is the triangle that I envision post Aurora.
Pankaj already knows this, but my experience so far is Verdance doesn't beat Florian. So I'm keen to hear what the shift is there for Florian. Like, are Verdance starting to tech more for what they expect Florians to do?
And I think that's a part of it, right? Where it's like we touched on this earlier, where we are entering a space in a metagame where people are allowed to start reacting to each other, and it will happen bi-directionally. Like Verdance can find a way to beat the Florians, like, because it does seem like that's kind of already what happened, right? I think a few weeks ago, if I asked you Verdance beats Florian, you'd be like, oh yeah, that Verdance beats Florian. And then now Florians have adapted a little bit or changed it a little bit, and they're like, oh, now we beat Verdance. And then Verdance gets to adapt again, and maybe Florian adapts back, and we have to see where it settles. But my current take is that I do think Verdance has the tools to combat whatever strategy the Florian wants to do. So, for example, if the Florian wants to try and fatigue the Verdance, I do think Evergreen is a card that Verdance lists. I mean, I think that is something that some Florians were thinking they can do, right?
Gotcha.
This would be like, I'm just gonna set up a bunch of rune chants and then have Tiara and just make it a deterministic draw as one potential option, or try and blow you up if I see an opening. But Evergreen from the Verdant side can solve that in a sense, right? If you just have like two Evergreens, it's like that strategy just completely doesn't work. And then the Scours, which is obviously an amazing tool.
Yeah, you got to be playing Scour right
that
now.
Verdant says actually. Yeah, you have to play Scour, and
Kano
then
Kano 2, Scours.
And then there's also talk about potentially remembrancing back Scours, depending on what the Florian tries to do, right? So, in theory, I feel like Verdance has tools that she needs to combat Florians based on the strategy that they present, but it sounds like you think there's a strategy Florian has that maybe consistently beats the Verdance.
Yeah, I think both those two strategies are strategies I've seen in the past week or so, and are not the ones I think you need to beat Florian. I think basically Florian's strategy at this point is present Reaping Blade, because you effectively just turn off the hero ability of your opponent to decompose enough to walk them down, and then just set up a stack and kill them.
Well, the Reaping Blade, present Reaping Blade to turn off the ability only works if you never attack the Verdants, right? Because if you attack them to decompose, they can go lower than you, and then they have a hero ability.
Correct. Yeah, they'll have a hero ability for a few turns, for sure. But the Verdance also needs to respond. Like they can't just sit there and let you stack. Like they have to be doing something in the game, right?
Wait, so when you say stack, are you talking about the strategy? I think I remember hearing about this, where the Florian plays a normal game into Verdance until at about 18 life, and then they just try and fatigue from there, and like they don't attack.
Don't fatigue.
Sorry, not fatigue. They just stack from there, where they try and stack up like 20 rune shots from there and then kill.
I think that's the basic principle that most Florians would be doing right now, I assume.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that's favored, though. I feel like I would still put the edge on the Verdant side if they can be diligent about their Scour usage. And like if the Florians is trying to set up something, and after the Verdant sends a Scour for 9, like back-to-back 3 times, that is damage that the Florian doesn't deal with, right? Unless you're talking about like this is another one I heard, like Arcanite Skullcap Florian, where you have like AB6 or something.
I wouldn't bother. That doesn't sound good.
Yeah, if you're talking about like normal, like they have AB3, the AB3 stuff is Carapace plus downrune boots, right? A few massive Scours in the end game, I think, deals with a strategy if the Verdance is careful not to just blow the Scours early on, right? If they're prepared for this.
Yeah, I think you've just got to be able to, like, you've just got to find your Scours at the right time, which is tough when you don't go to second cycle or to the end game, because you just don't get the opportunity to. Because they can decompose pretty quickly, sort of 4 or 5 turns, and then a couple of turns to stack up, 20, 25 rune chances is not a hard task. So I think it's just about the timing of the game. The fatigue one's interesting to me. I haven't heard that as much, but I did see people playing Evergreen.
It does feel like that kind of goes both ways, right? Like it's like, okay, Verdance finds Scours at the right time, but then also Florian needs to find it. If it's not going to second cycle, Florian also needs to find the rune chant generators at the correct time as well.
Yeah, I think my counter to that would be there's 3 Scours and there's like 20 rune chant generators. So it's like, I think the like for like is quite different. Like Florian can easily generate, 20 plus rune chants over 4 turns. Obviously there's Scours involved in there. That's significantly impactful for Verdance. If there's 2 Scours, at that point I'm like, I think you might be starting to shift the table. So I think it's definitely not unwinnable for Verdance. I think I'm interested to see how it starts to shake out. And I think there's other cards. Like I asked you about Pyroglyphic Protection. I couldn't remember the card's name, but I was like, oh, if Verdance is playing this card, because that card's quite interesting to me. If people are playing that card as well.
that will you just you have a couple of those, and it kind of just you can Striders it out because it is a wizard card, and then it nullifies the pop off turn that the Florian's been trying to set up.
Yeah, and then you can kill them afterwards because you can go low enough, and then you can actually gain the life to do your combo turn.
Exactly, and see, it's cards like this where it does, which is why I come back to it. Feels to me like Verdance has the answers for
I think it has
what
the
Florian
tools.
ends
I
up
think
doing.
it has the tools. Yeah.
Which to me feels like it's going to settle to a point where Verdance is favored into Florian.
Sure.
And then coming back to the triangle, I do think Nu is favored into Verdance. That seems like a matchup that's hard for the Verdance to solve. Believe me, we have tried. And then Florian is favored into Nu, which also I guess we can talk about Nu in a bit, because I think there are I think Nu investigating how to beat Florian we're still I think in the early-ish stages, because Florian is now becoming more prominent in the meta. But it'll be curious to see where that lands. I'm not super confident and Nu can find a way to flip the matchup, but I think they're interesting cards to take a look at.
I think you're just you're describing Flesh and Blood and the reality of modern day Flesh and Blood, which is that like we don't have polarizing matchups like we used to. Like every deck can find different angles of attack to try and beat up on another hero, or to find a way to turn an unfavorable matchup into favorable. It all comes down to what's your opportunity cost to do it. Like how many cards do you need to do it? How much do you need to change your game plan to do it? Like I think that almost any hero can beat any other hero with the right setup and the right cards in the deck. So I do think like that makes a lot of sense. Like heroes will react. I think what it always comes down to though in Flesh and Blood, and honestly you can just go back to the history of Flesh and Blood time and time again, this is what happens. The more powerful heroes, because of this fact, because of the consistency they have, because of the power of the cards they get to play and the game plans they get to enact, tend to land out on top, I think. So I am interested to see what the meta sort of looks like after, how people react. My gut feel is that Florian will be the best deck because I think it's the most inherently powerful, but I also agree that I think the format will warp. I have something else to table though. I think there's a hero that beats all three of these decks.
Oh? Do tell?
I think Syndra of Fire are good against all three of these decks.
See, I have heard that as well. And I could see it. I could see Fi. I think Fi, I agree with you. And I mean, I also did say like Fi like a week or two ago. But like while Aurora's still around, you just play Aurora. But once Aurora goes, I think my pick for the hero that fills the aggro void is Fi. Again, though, I'm curious to see how the others adapt to the ninjas. Syndra, I'm less convinced by, because especially the Earth heroes, I feel like they add in a couple of seeds of tomorrow if they really have to, and they already have a fair number of prevention effects.
It might be too good.
They each have the prevent twos, right? There's mental block in the Verdance, and then there's haunting rendition in Florian, and then there is shelters, obviously, which everyone has access to, and then they can add in seeds of tomorrow as well. And then I feel like Syndra, at least, I'm going to see an interesting Syndra build. Fire, I could see it. But also, my thing with that is that I feel like when we play these Earth heroes into Aurora, it still feels like there's a game to be played. And Fi is slower than Aurora. So, like, is it going to be that bad? Like, when I play against Aurora as like Verdance, I'm like, damn, she's sending 4/4/4, and that's so hard for me to deal with. But when I play Verdance into like the Fi, it's like, oh, he's going 3/3/3. I'm like, okay, this is so much easier to deal with. Where it's like, because he's just slower, it's like it feels like sometimes against Aurora, that's kind of all I need. I just need them to be like a turn slower, and I can beat them. So I do wonder whether that, like the sheer power level, to your point earlier, is maybe something that will hold the Draconic Ninjas back.
Could be. Yeah, I'm just speaking purely on what decks look like right now, right? If I think about what Verdance or Florian are doing, I think they're trying to deal with a lot of 4/4/4, right? And if you're going 1/1/2, 1/2, 3/2, 1/1 into like 10, it's a lot different. Like Mask of the Pouncing Lynx is a heck of a freaking card. So sure. I think it just depends on how these decks can respond, and also what's the opportunity cost if you then have to respond to Fi and Syndra. What are you potentially giving up in other matchups to do so? That's my interest right now. So, but yeah, I know I mostly agree. I think I mean the one thing we're not accounting for here is high seas, obviously, but that's because there's still another 3 weeks of ProQuest. Sorry, 2 weeks of ProQuest after Aurora's impending Living Legend. It seems like for us to consider, but. Yeah, I think it's 2 weeks it's not a lot of time to react. So my gut is telling me that Aurora's going to be have the highest win share this week, and then Florian's going to have the highest win share for the remaining 2 weeks. But I think, there's time for people to react. There's time for things to change. And then after that, it kind of doesn't matter too much because high seeds will come out and the format will likely shift again before US Nationals.
The Florence, I think I agree with you. Florian will have the higher win share post Aurora, mostly because I think like Verdance being the like initial most obvious sort of counter pick isn't that popular in a sense. I just don't see too many people sort of pivoting to Verdance in a sense. I think more people just go play Florian rather than go play Verdance if that's the only thing that consistently
You're
beats it.
underestimating the amount of Wizard Copers out there. There's a lot of them.
No, there are. I just think there are more Runeblade players and more like it's
What's the Kano Verdance matchup like?
From what I've heard, if the Verdance has Seeds of Tomorrow, then it's a game. And if the Verdance doesn't have Seeds of Tomorrow, it's a 20%.
Oh, so Kano must be pretty good. Kano must be pretty well positioned then. I think Kano is quite a powerful hero right now, but it's very inconsistent. I've played that deck a little bit this past week, and it frustrates the hell out of me in its current iteration. But I do think Kano is very good into Florian. I think in theory it should be really good into the Earth heroes in general, which it sounds like maybe Seeds of Tomorrow might help change that a little bit. But I don't know what the Kano new matchup's like. I imagine from previous...
It's Kano favored.
And I think from memory, obviously again it's changed a lot, but like decks like Fire and Syndra can't actually they don't have Spell Void gloves, for instance, like Aurora did. So I don't know, man. Maybe Kano is really well positioned.
Yeah, I think that's also I think I was theorizing the triangle between Verdance, Florian, and Nu, but yeah, I think Kano is definitely in there and potentially disrupting the triangle fully complete. I think Kano is favored into at least the way the decks are built currently, which is to be able to combat Aurora. I think Kano is favored into Nu, favored into Florian, and the Verdance one is interesting. It depends what the Verdance has the tech. I do want to talk about Nu a little bit. I think there are interesting developments that could happen in the Nu space. Something that I was trying this past weekend. Again, like I said, I was bringing some spice because honestly, I wanted to feel something. Because I think I mentioned before, I've been sort of struggling to find a hero and strategy that I really enjoy playing. So what I started with, it does feel like Nu's main game plan, primary game plan to most heroes right now is to deck them out, right? Is kind of to fatigue them. It does feel like she's not killing people with damage anymore fully, like what she used to do back in Art of War days. So I decided, what if we sort of commit to mill sort of being a bit of a strategy? So I started running Eradicates. And I was pretty happy with that choice into Auroras and stuff. They sort of always need to respect it because otherwise you take a full turn cycle away from them, right? When you're threatening a mill strategy, and they typically need to save a defense reaction as well because if you pitch for the Eradicate, you have some floating, you could buff it or whatever. So that was interesting. The other card I think people might start experimenting with when it comes to the Florian matchup is Intimate Inducement. And I feel like, knowing you and what I know about you, I feel like your eyes are gonna glaze over and you're gonna hate this. But the idea is that Florian does have a limited number of threats. A lot of the deck is these Mopey blocking cards, Mopey Earth cards, and a bunch of defense reactions.
Yeah.
To the point where it's very difficult to get to the threats in their hand. They're typically holding one threat and then 2 defense reactions and a blocking card or whatever, right? So it's very difficult to get the one in their hand. So the idea is you get the ones in their deck.
I can see that.
So I was running blue. Intimate Inducement, and I actually it was well. There's a couple of things. Firstly, there was a surprise factor in the fact that it's a 0-cost react.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just aren't playing around it. I'm Leave No Witnesses holding 1 card, Tunic's not up. They're I just need to block 4. For example, the Aurora is just I need to block 4. And then you play it Intimate Inducement. Now you are forced to pull a card off the top of the deck, but Aurora has a fair number of no blocks. And of course, any blue you pull off the top will also be a no block. So you still get the on hit. But the worst case, the floor is that your blue traded for one of their reds. Right, if I pull a red off the top, then my blue traded for one of their reds, which still puts me up in this sort of milling out my opponent's strategy. Of course, into Aurora, you're not supposed to take damage to play it. It's really I was left with this, then I'll go ahead and resolve it. Not, I'm going to take 3 damage to play it. But I think that was interesting that a 0-cost react was something a lot of people weren't prepared for. But into Florian, I think you actively don't care about the text where it turns blues into 0 defense. You actually just want to hit their Fellings, their Runechan generators, their whatever off the top, because you can't get the ones in their hand or even the ones in their arsenal if they even have any there. So I think that's a card that News might want to start looking into, like ways to actively just get the threats out of the Florian's deck that doesn't involve on hits and doesn't involve hitting the hand or arsenal.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, interesting. Well, I think that kind of... I mean, the only note I had was I think Guardians had a fleeting 2 weeks of a possible dream that's about to die a horrible death until the Mastery set, because I think it's like, oh, Aurora is a bit out of the format, is Jarl a thing? And it's... I mean, Jarl did have equal fourth most wins in ProQuest last week. But I think what's going to happen is Aurora's going to go, and I think Guardian's going to get eaten up by all the wizards and News and Florian's hanging, all the Earth heroes hanging around. So,
well, new into Jarl isn't that
sure. Yeah, that's true.
bad
That's
for
true.
Jarl.
That's
I mean, that's fine. But yeah, into Verdance and Florian, I'm not entirely sure what Jarl can do. I think for a while Jarls were like, oh yeah, we can blow up the grasp.
Sure.
But then Florian doesn't care, right?
Exactly. Does not care.
He's just sitting there with 10 rune chance anyway. He's not activating that. He's just chilling until he has 50.
Yeah. Oh no. I lose a point of defense.
What's CYB Jarl like into Florian?
I mean, if you know, you present Reaping Blade. I mean, I played a CYB Jarl in my quarterfinals. I didn't present Reaping Blade. I built 81 rune chance and I threw it at their face.
Okay, that makes sense.
It was kind of close though because I didn't present Reaping Blade, but it was fine. I don't know.
So what was their life total when you sent the 81 rune chance?
67 or something. No, maybe more. 68. I don't know, something like that.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
Not high enough, basically.
Not high enough for my 81 rune chance. I had to start. The judge gave me a piece of paper to write down my rune chance because I had too many rune chance for dice. I ran out of dice.
And what was the Jarl's AB loadout?
Heart of Ice and something else. AB2, I think.
Okay, that does feel if you know you're against Scepter Florian, I do think you need full AB3. Like
Probably.
I don't think it would have saved. It doesn't sound. It actually, I don't know how many rune chance would they have saved if they had AB3.
I actually lost two. I only played one tree. I lost two trees. I lost a tree to a pummel and something else.
Okay, and you still made 81 rune chance. That's wild. Yeah. There is something to be said about once New leaves and the Guardians get to run the offensive blues again.
Yeah, I agree. I massively agree.
I wouldn't put them. Yeah, I wouldn't put them as like, oh, okay, now you're favored into Florian and Verdance, but now you actually get to play the game.
Yeah, you get to have a plan.
Yeah, so that's like a future conversation for like post New.
I agree. Cool. Well, I'm very interested to see what happens this weekend. I think this weekend is going to be a bit of a bridging week. I think we're going to see Aurora kind of, take it again. I mean, doesn't need many wins to hit Living Legend. It feels like if I had to put a percentage on it right now, about 97% to Living Legend this coming weekend. So I think you can take that one to the bank, probably. I'm interested to see what happens in the last 2 weeks of ProQuest season. I'm on the hunt to get my qualification to Singapore, which I'm planning to play at. So I would like to get my invitation for that, save a PTI. And then we'll go high seas. I mean, high seas is literally like we're 3 weeks away from World Premiere, so it's kind of insane at this point.
And we're 2 weeks away from spoiler season. I'm super hyped for that. Once again, we do have a spoiler coming out.
Busted.
It'll be on May 15th. Be on the lookout for that.
All right, that is episode 211 of Arsenal Pass. Thank you for listening. Shout out to the Arsenal Pass patrons, and we'll see you next week.